The storm clouds crowded the horizon like mourners at a funeral, their dark edges rippling with lightning that flashed warnings across the sky. Inside the crippled C-130, smoke filled the cockpit as Captain Samantha Donovan fought with failing controls, her hands steady even as fire consumed the right wing. The rest of her crew lay unconscious behind her, victims of rapid decompression, leaving her alone to guide 40 tons of burning metal home. They had called her just a cargo pilot for years, until that night when she became the only hope for 12 lives hanging in the balance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had begun like countless others at Hawkins Airbase, a sprawling military complex carved into the red clay hills of eastern Georgia. As dawn painted the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold, Captain Samantha Donovan strode across the tarmac toward Echo 7, her C-130 Hercules. The aircraft sat like a weathered sentinel among the gleaming fighter jets that dominated the prime positions near the operations building. Sam ran her hand along Echo 7's fuselage, feeling the imperfections that told stories of service far more meaningful than the aircraft's appearance suggested. The olive green paint had been sandblasted to a dull finish by countless missions through harsh environments, and patches of bare metal showed through near the cargo door, where equipment had scraped against it during rapid deployments. "Morning, old girl," she murmured, her ritual unchanged after 8 years of flying together. "Let's see what they've got for us today." Her crew worked with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had learned to function beyond the spotlight. First Lieutenant Riley Jacobson, her co-pilot, methodically inspected the landing gear, his expression serious beneath his regulation. Cap. At 25, he was still finding his confidence, but his technical skills were impeccable, and his loyalty to Sam was absolute. Near the cargo ramp, Master Sergeant Gabriela Gabi Cortez checked load configurations with the casual competence of someone who had spent 15 years calculating weight distributions in her head. Technical Sergeant Frank Daniels moved between diagnostic panels with quiet precision, his fingers dancing across systems with an intuitive understanding that no computer could match. The far side of the airfield told a different story entirely. A row of F-35 fighters gleamed under the morning sun, their sleek fuselages washed and polished to a mirror finish. Camera crews circled them like satellites, capturing footage for the base's latest publicity campaign. Pilots in pristine flight suits posed for photographs, their aviator sunglasses reflecting the admiring faces of the public affairs team, looking good for the cameras, Gabby commented without looking up from her clipboard. "Must be nice to have your own personal detailing crew." Sam didn't respond. She had learned long ago that commenting on the disparity between cargo and fighter operations only wasted energy she needed for her actual job. Instead, she continued her pre-flight checks with the thorough attention that had become her trademark. At the center of the media circus stood Colonel Victoria Hayes, the newly appointed Public Affairs Director. Her tablet never left her hand, as she orchestrated the photo shoot with the precision of a symphony conductor. Her voice carried across the tarmac in carefully modulated tones designed to sound authoritative without being harsh. "Fighter pilots to the left, please. We need that sunrise angle for the recruitment materials. Support staff, please remain beyond the media perimeter." Near the fuel depot, a ground crewman nudged his colleague and nodded toward Echo 7. "Check out the flying warehouse," he said, loud enough to carry. "Guess they let anyone with a pilot's license fly those things." Captain James Westfield strode past at that moment, his flight suit artfully unzipped to reveal the squadron patch on his t-shirt. 3 combat tours had given him the perfect combination of confidence and casual disdain that photographed well for recruitment posters. He paused to look at the C-130, making sure others noticed his attention. "Still flying that ancient beast, Donovan?" he called out. Thought they'd have put you on something that requires actual skill by now. Several nearby pilots laughed on cue. Someone raised a phone to capture Sam in the background of their selfie, as though collecting evidence of an endangered species. Sam noted the hydraulic pressure readings, made a small mark on her checklist, and continued working. Her crew maintained their focus, professionals in a world that often confused flash for substance. Riley adjusted a gauge near the front landing gear and deliberately avoided looking in Westfield's direction. Frank never lifted his eyes from his diagnostic tablet, and Gabi muttered just loud enough for Sam to hear, "The circus is in town early this year." Sam allowed herself one slow breath before moving to the next item on her checklist. The tarmac radiated heat through the soles of her boots, but she didn't shift her weight or seek shade. The work mattered more than comfort, and excellence required attention to details others might consider insignificant. Inside the operations center, Major Lawrence Bennett studied the mission board with growing frustration. The day's flight operations appeared on the large display in neat, color-coded blocks: fighter training missions, aerial demonstrations, and VIP transport, all clearly labeled. Echo 7's designation was conspicuously absent from the primary schedule, marked only as standby logistics in a footnote at the bottom. "Sir," a young communications officer approached with a tablet. "Captain Donovan is requesting confirmation of today's supply run to Forward Base Indigo." Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bennett frowned. "That hasn't been approved yet. Tell her we're prioritizing the demonstration flights for the congressional delegation. Cargo operations are on standby." From across the room, Colonel Hayes looked up from her conversation with a public affairs specialist. "If they need something to do, they can transport the media equipment to Maxwell after the press event. No rush on that, we won't need it until next week." Bennett didn't argue. He tapped an icon on his screen and reassigned Echo 7 to equipment transport, a mission any junior pilot could handle. Outside, Westfield stepped into a patch of shade and took a long drink from a branded water bottle emblazoned with the fighter squadron's logo. When another pilot asked about the day's demonstration parameters, he gestured vaguely toward the cargo aircraft. "We're loaded with high-visibility maneuvers," he said. "Supersonic passes, formation breaks, the works. Real pilot stuff, not just hauling freight from point A to point B." Someone nearby chuckled. "That's the bus drivers for you. Always on standby, never in the show." But Sam and her crew continued their preparations without commentary. Every system was checked twice, every procedure followed to the letter. Echo 7 might not gleam like the fighters, but it was ready for whatever mission came its way. And in the world of military aviation, where preparation often meant the difference between mission success and failure, that readiness mattered more than appearance. As the morning briefing approached, Sam rolled her shoulders to release the tension that had built between them. The clipboard slid into its designated holder with practiced ease. She didn't need to issue verbal commands to her crew. They knew the routine as well as she did. She turned once toward the control tower, noted the windsock's direction, then walked to where Gabi was finalizing the cargo manifest. "Are we flying today, Captain?" Gabi asked, though they both knew the answer. Sam glanced at the sky then. Back at the airfield where fighter pilots were gathering for their briefing, their laughter carrying across the tarmac. "Not yet," she said quietly. Gabi didn't press further. Behind them, Riley was still reviewing weather data, methodically cross-checking forecasts against historical patterns for their usual routes. Frank disconnected his diagnostic equipment and secured the panels without making a sound. They worked in practiced harmony, their efficiency born from mutual respect rather than external validation. Their names might not appear on the primary mission board, but they were ready. And sometimes, Sam thought as she watched the media event unfold across the tarmac, Being ready was its own form of excellence. The morning briefing room hummed with the controlled energy of pilots preparing for high-visibility operations. Rows of metal folding chairs filled quickly as fighter pilots settled in, their flight suits pristine, name patches perfectly aligned under the fluorescent lights. At the front, a large projection screen displayed the day's flight plans in crisp blue graphics, aerial demonstration routes, timing markers, and camera positions all meticulously plotted. Sam entered quietly, carrying a folder with her own mission parameters. She'd spent an hour that morning studying alternate routes to forward base Indigo, analyzing weather patterns that might affect their flight path if they received clearance. The supplies she transported, medical equipment, replacement parts, and specialized ammunition, were critical to operations at the remote outpost, even if her missions rarely made the highlight reel. She found an empty seat near the back, next to a group of younger pilots who were reviewing their notes. As she sat down, one of them, Lieutenant Rodriguez, glanced at her patches and nodded respectfully. "Morning, Captain," he said quietly. "Heard you pulled off that nighttime supply drop to Outpost Sierra last month during the electrical storm. That's serious flying." Before Sam could respond, Westfield's voice cut across the room from 2 rows ahead. "Easy there, Rodriguez," he said with a practiced smile. "Don't get too impressed by the bus routes. Different world entirely." Several pilots chuckled. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable and turned back to his notes. Colonel Hayes stepped to the front of the room, tablet in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the polished cadence of someone accustomed to media presentations. "Today's operations will be under full congressional observation with accompanying press coverage. You are representing not just this base, but American air power globally. Appearance and execution must be flawless." She clicked through several slides showing camera positions and demonstration sequences. "Primary combat aircraft will be featured prominently. Support operations will remain peripheral unless specifically requested for background footage." Sam shifted in her seat. She'd flown combat support missions for 8 years, delivering everything from emergency medical supplies to tactical equipment under hostile conditions. The casual dismissal of her work as mere background stung, but she kept her expression neutral as Hayes continued. Major Bennett took the podium next. "Weather looks optimal for the primary demonstration flights," he announced, "but we're tracking potential turbulence in the northwestern corridor that could affect afternoon operations." Westfield raised his hand. "Sir, what's our contingency if the turbulence affects the final formation pass? We don't want to disappoint our distinguished visitors." "Valid concern," Bennett replied. "We'll have alternate routines prepared. Our support assets can adjust their schedules as needed to accommodate any changes." Sam felt heat rise in her chest. The casual way they discussed rearranging cargo operations missions that often carried time-sensitive supplies to personnel who depended on them made her jaw tighten. But she remained silent, knowing from experience that objections would be dismissed as lack of team spirit. After the briefing, pilots gathered in small groups, discussing maneuver timing and formation positions. Sam approached the main planning table where Bennett stood reviewing the master schedule. "Sir," she said politely, "I wanted to confirm whether Echo 7 is cleared for the Indigo supply run today." Their commander reported that the medical refrigeration unit is showing signs of failure, and we're carrying replacement components. Bennett barely glanced up from his tablet. "That's been deprioritized, Captain. Congressional delegation takes precedence. You can run it tomorrow or the next day." "With respect, sir, if their medical refrigeration fails, they'll lose vaccines and blood supplies. Forward Base Indigo is supporting 3 remote villages with medical outreach." Bennett's expression hardened slightly. "Captain Donovan, I understand your concern, but today's demonstrations have strategic importance for continued funding. Your cargo run can wait 24 hours. Actually, sir, Sam persisted, keeping her voice level, I've flown that route. In all conditions. If we depart by 1400 hours, we can complete the delivery and be back before the evening demonstration, even accounting for the northwestern turbulence. Colonel Hayes, who had been listening from nearby, stepped closer. Captain, perhaps you don't understand the significance of today's events. Congressman Fletcher sits on the Appropriations Committee that determines our budget for next year's fighter program. The cargo delivery schedule is not the priority. Sam felt the dismissal like a physical weight. Around the table, other officers suddenly found their notes fascinating, the atmosphere charged with the tension that follows a public rebuke. Of course, she said simply. Just trying to ensure all mission requirements are met. As she turned to leave, she heard Westfield's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. Some people think driving a truck through the sky makes them tactical experts. The comment drew uncomfortable chuckles, but Sam didn't turn around. She walked out of the briefing room with her shoulders straight and her expression neutral, even as frustration simmered beneath the surface. Outside, Riley waited by the coffee station. He'd obviously heard at least part of the exchange through the open door. Captain, he began, his expression concerned. That was nothing, Sam interrupted. We've got prep work to do for tomorrow's run. But as they walked back toward Echo 7, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The dismissal wasn't just professional, it felt personal. And in an environment where respect directly impacted operational effectiveness, personal friction had a way of creating dangerous situations. Gabby looked up from her inventory checklist as they approached the aircraft. How'd the briefing go? She asked. Sam paused at the base of the cargo ramp. In the distance, she could see Westfield's squadron gathering for a pre-flight photo session, their poses calculated for maximum visual impact. About as expected, she said. But deep down, she knew this pattern of marginalization was becoming more entrenched, and the consequences extended beyond her own career. The supplies sitting in Eco 7's cargo hold weren't abstract concepts. They were resources that real people needed, sometimes desperately. The next morning brought new restrictions that landed on Sam's desk with the subtlety of a hammer strike. The memorandum came on official letterhead, signed by Colonel Hayes and countersigned by Major Bennett. The language was bureaucratic and precise, but the message was unmistakable, effective immediately. All support aircraft must submit flight plan amendments at least 3 hours prior to scheduled departure. This includes altitude adjustments, timing modifications, and approach variations. Due to increased VIP presence and media coverage, any non-emergency deviations must receive prior authorization through Operations Command. Sam read the memo twice, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. 3 hours notice for route changes meant she couldn't adapt to real-time conditions, weather shifts, ground threats, or tactical requirements that demanded immediate decisions. It was like asking a surgeon to commit to every incision before seeing the patient. Riley looked over her shoulder at the memo. This is about yesterday, isn't it? He said quietly. Before Sam could respond, Frank appeared at the office doorway, his expression unusually grim. You need to hear this, he said, jerking his thumb toward the maintenance hangar. They followed him across the tarmac to where a group of mechanics were working on various aircraft. The conversation stopped when they approached, but Technical Sergeant Maria Vasquez, a veteran crew chief Sam had known for years, caught her eye and nodded toward a quieter corner of the hangar. Captain, she said in a low voice, thought you should know there's been talk about Echo 7's maintenance status. Sam frowned. What kind of talk? Vasquez glanced around, then leaned closer. Someone's been asking questions about your last inspection cycle, specifically whether you're fully mission ready or just pushed through the paperwork. The implication hit like ice water. In military aviation, questioning an aircraft's maintenance record was serious business, It could ground a crew indefinitely while investigations were conducted. Who's asking? Sam kept her voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Can't say for sure, Vasquez replied. But Colonel Hayes was down here yesterday with some efficiency consultant, asking about cargo aircraft service records. Crew rest compliance, all kinds of stuff that's never been an issue before. Riley's face darkened. They're building a case, he said quietly. Or trying to, Gabby added, having joined them silently. Question is, what kind of case? Their answer came that afternoon. Sam was reviewing weather patterns in the pilot's lounge when Lieutenant Rodriguez approached her table. He looked uncomfortable, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Captain Donovan, he said quietly, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but there's a rumor going around that your crew has been cutting corners on safety protocols. Sam's water bottle stopped halfway to her lips. Excuse me? Look, I don't believe it, Rodriguez said quickly. But Westfield's been telling people that cargo pilots don't follow the same standards as combat crews. Says the pressure to make delivery schedules leads to taking risks with equipment and procedures. The accusation was so absurd it took Sam a moment to process. Her safety record was spotless: 8 years of flying without a single incident, crew injury, or mission failure. She'd never compromised on safety, never pushed equipment beyond its limits, never placed her crew at risk for any reason. That's completely false, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I know that, Rodriguez replied, looking genuinely troubled. But perception matters around here, especially with all the VIPs and media. Westfield's got the colonel's ear. And with all the cameras rolling. He shrugged helplessly. That evening, Sam found herself alone in Eco 7's cargo bay, running her hands along equipment tie-downs that had been secured and checked a dozen times. The aircraft was quiet around her, filled with the familiar sense of hydraulic fluid, metal, and the lingering traces of jet fuel that permeated every surface. Frank appeared at the rear ramp, carrying a small toolbox. Thought you might be here, he said simply. Just checking things over, Sam replied, though they both knew every inch of the aircraft had already been inspected twice that day. Frank nodded and began examining cargo anchor points with meticulous attention. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Had an interesting conversation with one of the avionics techs today, he said without looking up. Seems there's been some discussion about whether cargo crews really understand advanced navigation systems. Sam's hand stilled on the cargo strap she was adjusting. Go on. Funny thing is, this tech remembered a mission from last year. Remember when that sandstorm knocked out GPS coverage over the eastern sector? And guess who brought a medical team home using nothing but old-school navigation and terrain features? She remembered that night, 6 hours of flying through conditions that had grounded everything else, navigating by compass and landmarks to guide a team with a critically injured soldier back to base. No fanfare, no media coverage, just another day's work. The point is, Frank continued, tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. Some people remember who actually gets the job done when systems fail and conditions turn bad. The next morning brought another memo, this one requiring cargo operations to file detailed mission reports within 2 hours of landing, while fighter operations had 24 hours for the same paperwork. The message was becoming clearer with each new directive. Cargo crews were being held to different standards, subjected to extra scrutiny, and systematically marginalized. Riley found Sam in the operations tent, staring at the latest requirement with barely contained frustration. This is harassment, he said bluntly. This is politics, she corrected. But as she looked around the operations center at the wall of fighter squadron photos, the media schedule prominently displayed on the main bulletin board, the coffee mugs branded with fighter jet silhouettes, she realized something important. She wasn't just being marginalized. She was being systematically pushed aside to make room for a narrative that didn't include her. And in a military environment where visibility equaled validity, invisibility could be career-ending. But Sam had learned something in 8 years. Of flying missions nobody else wanted. Sometimes the most important work happened when nobody was watching. And sometimes when everyone else was focused on the spotlight, the real professionals were preparing for the moment when the lights went out. That night, she sat in Echo 7's cockpit and pulled out a worn photograph she kept behind her pilot's license. It showed a woman standing beside an older model C-130, her flight suit dusty but her smile radiant. Her mother, Captain Elizabeth Donovan, had flown cargo aircraft during the Gulf War, when women in combat aviation were even rarer than they were now. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were the words her mother had written before her final mission. When the storm comes, they don't care what patch is on your shoulder. They only care if you can fly. Sam traced the words with her fingertip. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new restrictions, new attempts to diminish her role. But she had work to do and people who depended on her to do it right. Let them have their cameras and their politics. When the time came, and it always did, she'd be ready. The crisis came at 0317 hours on a Tuesday morning that began like any other. Sam was reviewing weather patterns for the days scheduled. Equipment transport when the base-wide alert system shattered the pre-dawn quiet. 3 long siren blasts sent personnel scrambling toward the operations center. All available aircraft, came the urgent voice over the intercom. We have a critical situation at Forward Operating Base Echo. Flash flooding has compromised the medical facility. Immediate evacuation required for patients and essential personnel. Sam was already moving, flight bag in hand, when Colonel Hayes's voice cut through the emergency channel. Primary response assets only. Fighter Squadron Alpha provide aerial. Reconnaissance. Medevac units prepare for possible extraction. Support assets remain on standby. Sam froze in the doorway. Forward Operating Base Echo was positioned in a narrow valley, its landing zone barely large enough for a helicopter in ideal conditions. With flash flooding, that tiny LZ would be partially submerged and dangerous for rotary aircraft. The fighter jets could provide eyes on the situation, but couldn't land or extract anyone. Riley appeared at her shoulder, breathless from his sprint across the tarmac. "Captain, we should be launching." Echo 7 is the only aircraft that can land on FOB Echo's emergency strip in these conditions. "I know," Sam replied quietly, watching. Fighter pilots sprint toward their aircraft while mechanics rush to prepare the base's 2 medical helicopters. Minutes ticked by as radio communications grew increasingly chaotic. The fighter jets reached FOB Echo first, confirming what Sam already suspected. "Control, this is Raptor 1. Westfield's voice crackled through the speakers. "Visual confirmation of extensive flooding. Primary LZ is completely underwater. Medical facility has been evacuated to high ground, but we've got at least a dozen. Personnel requiring immediate extraction, including 3 critical care patients on stretchers." "Understood, Raptor 1, came the controller's voice. "Medevac units, what's your status?" The lead helicopter pilot's response was immediate. "Control. Mercy 1. Current conditions exceed our operational parameters for the mountain approach. Strong downdrafts in the valley and no viable landing zone. We need an alternate extraction plan." 27 minutes after the initial alert, with no solution in place, Sam made her decision. She keyed her radio. "Control. This is Echo 7 requesting immediate clearance for emergency extraction at FOB. Echo, we can utilize the emergency runway on the eastern ridge." The response came from Colonel Hayes rather than the tower controller. "Echo 7, remain on standby. Primary assets are handling the situation." Sam kept her voice level despite her growing frustration. "Ma'am, with respect, Echo 7 is equipped for rough field landings in adverse conditions. The eastern ridge runway remains above the floodplain. Request permission to launch immediate extraction mission. A tense silence filled the frequency before Hayes responded, her voice sharp with authority. Captain Donovan, you are not authorized for this operation. Remain on standby pending further instructions. Sam looked at her crew. Riley's jaw was tight with frustration. Gabby had already prepared the cargo bay for medical evacuation configuration. Frank monitored the escalating radio traffic as ground. Personnel at FOB ECO reported rising water levels and deteriorating medical conditions for the critical patients. 32 minutes after the initial alert, Major Bennett's voice joined the frequency. All available extraction assets. Report capabilities for FOB ECO immediately. This was it. Sam keyed her radio again. Control, Echo 7 is configured for immediate medical evacuation. Crew is standing by, familiar with FOB ECO emergency strip approach procedures. The silence stretched so long she thought her transmission hadn't gone through. Then Hayes's voice, cold as steel. Echo 7, you are specifically ordered to maintain position. Any unauthorized launch will result in immediate disciplinary action. The words hit like physical blows. Around the radio, her crew went still. Riley's face flushed with anger, while Gabby shook her head in disbelief. On the frequency, they could hear FOB ECO's commander growing desperate. Any available aircraft. We have 3 critical patients requiring immediate evacuation. Flooding is worsening. We need extraction now. At that moment, Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice joined the frequency. Control. This is Talon 2. I've got mountain landing certification, but my aircraft has no medical equipment. Recommend coordination with cargo assets for proper evacuation capability. Rodriguez was trying to help, but his intervention only highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Everyone knew Echo 7 was the right aircraft for the job. Everyone. Except the people making the decisions. 45 minutes after the initial alert, a third medical helicopter was dispatched from a base 70 miles away. It would take them nearly an hour to reach FOB ECO time the critical patients might not have. Sam sat in Eco 7's cockpit, hands gripping controls that could have completed the mission in less than 20 minutes. Her crew sat in frustrated silence around her, professional discipline at war with human concern. Skip, Rayleigh said quietly, using her unofficial CAL sign. This is wrong. She nodded slowly. It was wrong completely, inexcusably wrong. People were suffering on a mountainside because politics had overruled common sense, because image mattered more than mission, because someone had decided that her crew wasn't worthy of doing the job they'd trained their entire careers to do. The real breaking point came 4 hours later when the distant medical helicopter finally returned with the evacuated patients. 2 survived. The third, a young specialist with a treatable head injury, died during the extended flight, his condition deteriorating beyond recovery during the long wait for evacuation. The after-action briefing was held in the main conference room with full media presence. Colonel Hayes stood at the front, presenting a polished summary of the operation that focused on the heroic coordination between air assets and ground personnel in challenging conditions. She made no mention of the delayed response, no mention of the specialist who died waiting, no acknowledgement that a faster, more capable aircraft had sat on the tarmac ready to help. When questions were opened to the floor, Sam stood up. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "I'd like to clarify the timeline for the medical evacuation." Hayes's professional smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. "Captain Donovan, I believe we've covered the operational details sufficiently. Have we?" Sam asked. "Because according to my calculations, Eco 7 could have reached FOB ECO in 18 minutes from the initial alert. Instead, the evacuation took 107 minutes from start to finish." The room went silent. Camera operators looked uncertain whether they should keep filming. Westfield shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Captain," Hayes said, her voice taking on a warning tone. Operational critique should be conducted through proper channels, not in public forums. Ma'am, Sam replied, when proper channels result in preventable casualties, perhaps public forums are exactly where these discussions belong. The silence that followed was absolute. Hayes's polished composure cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Captain Donovan, she said slowly, you're out of line. No, ma'am, Sam said, standing straighter. I'm exactly where I need to be. That night, alone in Eco 7's cargo bay, Sam made a decision. She pulled out her mother's photograph and studied it in the dim emergency lighting. Her mother had faced her own battles in a system that didn't value what she brought to the fight, but she'd found a way to prove her worth when it mattered most. Now it was Sam's turn. She couldn't change what had happened today, but she could make sure it never happened again. She could be ready for the moment when politics failed and only competence mattered. She could prepare for the time when the lights went out and everyone would need her to light the way home. The investigation began quietly, like all the best intelligence operations. Sam didn't storm into offices demanding answers or file official complaints that would disappear into bureaucratic black holes. Instead, she did what she did best. She prepared methodically, gathering information with the same precision she used for pre-flight checklists. Her first ally was unexpected. Master Sergeant Victor Ramirez, the base's senior records specialist, had been watching the political maneuvering with growing disgust. A 24-year veteran who'd seen enough power games to recognize injustice, Ramirez had access to files, regulations, and most importantly, the kind of institutional memory that couldn't be found in official records. You want to know something interesting? Ramirez said, sliding a folder across his desk during what appeared to be a routine administrative visit. I pulled the mission completion rates for the past 3 years. Guess which aircraft has the highest success rate for critical missions? Sam opened the folder and felt her breath catch. The numbers were stark. Echo 7 had a 98.7% mission completion rate compared to the squadron average of 87.4%. More telling, when missions were categorized by difficulty, adverse weather, hostile territory, emergency response, her numbers went even higher. There's more, Ramirez continued, glancing toward the door to ensure they weren't overheard. I cross-referenced these stats with media coverage reports. Interesting pattern emerges. The second sheet showed media mentions by aircraft type. Fighter operations were featured in over 900 stories, interviews, and photo spreads over the past 2 years. Cargo operations, despite flying more missions in more dangerous conditions, appeared in exactly 17 mentions, all as background references. Someone's been very careful about controlling the narrative, Ramirez said quietly. That evening, Sam met with Lieutenant Rodriguez at a coffee shop off base. Rodriguez had been struggling with his own conscience since the FOB Eco incident. And when Sam reached out, he agreed to talk. I've been flying for 6 years, Rodriguez said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. I've seen good pilots get buried by politics, and I've seen mediocre ones get promoted because they looked good on camera. But what happened yesterday? He shook his head. That crossed a line. I need to know something, Sam said. Is this just about me, or is it bigger? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Westfield's got ambitions, he finally said. Squadron commander, then wing commander. Maybe stars someday. But his actual combat record is thin. Most of his missions have been high visibility, low risk operations. Perfect for media coverage, not so perfect for demonstrating actual combat leadership. So he needs to control the narrative, Sam finished. Exactly. Can't have cargo pilots showing up his tactical expertise. Can't have support crews getting credit for the dangerous missions. Rodriguez met her eyes. Problem is, you're too good at your job to ignore completely. So instead of competing with me professionally, he's trying to eliminate me politically, Sam concluded. The next piece of the puzzle came from Gabi, who'd been quietly networking with other loadmasters across the base. She discovered something significant. The new restrictions on cargo operations weren't just affecting Echo 7. 3 other cargo crews had been similarly marginalized, their expertise dismissed in favor of primary assets that often couldn't actually complete the required missions. It's systematic, Gabi reported during a crew meeting in Echo 7's cargo bay. They're restructuring the entire support command to minimize cargo operations visibility, making us invisible. Frank, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. There's something else, he said. I've been talking to some of the older maintenance chiefs. They remember when your mother flew specifically. They remember why she left active duty. Sam looked up sharply. Her mother rarely talked about her military service, especially the end of it. Same playbook, different decade, Frank continued. Same politics. They couldn't question her competence, so they questioned her judgment. Made her prove herself over and over until she got tired of fighting and took early retirement. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Her mother, the woman who'd taught her that flying was about service, not glory, had been pushed out by the same kind of political maneuvering Sam was facing now. But Frank wasn't finished. Thing is, your mother kept records, detailed records. And according to Ramirez, those records are still in the base archives. That weekend, Sam found herself in the basement of the base library, surrounded by filing cabinets that hadn't been digitized yet. The records were there, exactly as Frank had indicated: her mother's personnel files, mission reports, and most importantly, the documentation of her battles against a system determined to diminish her contributions. The parallels were eerie: the same language, the same tactics, even some of the same people, now in higher positions. But her mother had made one crucial mistake. She'd fought the system from within, using proper channels and official procedures. That could be controlled, delayed, or buried. Sam wasn't going to make that mistake. She pulled out her phone and began photographing the most relevant documents, then cross-referenced them with the current situation, building a timeline that showed not just bias, but a pattern of systematic discrimination spanning decades. By Sunday evening, she had what she needed: evidence, allies, and most importantly, a plan that would force the issue into the open where political maneuvering couldn't control the outcome. The key was timing. She needed a moment when competence would matter more than politics, when actual results would outweigh public relations, when the system's own failures would create the opportunity she needed to prove her worth. She didn't have to wait long. Weather reports were tracking a major storm system moving toward the region, bringing heavy thunderstorms and potential electrical interference. The kind of weather that grounded fair weather pilots and separated professionals from pretenders. Sam smiled as she studied the meteorological data. Her mother's photograph was still tucked behind her pilot's license, a reminder that the best pilots weren't the ones who looked good in perfect conditions. They were the ones who could fly when everyone else was grounded. The storm was coming, and when it hit, all the media coverage and political maneuvering in the world wouldn't change one simple fact: some missions required more than a pretty smile and a photogenic aircraft. They required someone who knew how to fly in the dark. The storm arrived with unexpected ferocity, rolling in from the west like a wall of angry black clouds shot through with veins of lightning. By 1600 hours, visibility had dropped to less than a quarter mile, and thunderstorms were creating dangerous wind shear conditions across the entire region. Sam watched the weather develop from Echo 7's cockpit, monitoring multiple radio frequencies. As base operations struggled to adapt to rapidly changing conditions, the afternoon's planned VIP flights were canceled one by one, and the aerial demonstrations that had been scheduled for visiting defense contractors were indefinitely postponed. What wasn't canceled, however, was the urgent request that came in at 17:28 hours. All available aircraft, came the strained voice of the base emergency coordinator. "We have a critical situation at Camp Dawson. Lightning strike has damaged their communications array and caused multiple injuries. Medical supplies and communications equipment required immediately. Weather conditions deteriorating rapidly." Camp Dawson was a mountain training facility 50 miles northwest of the base, accessible only by a narrow airstrip cut into dense forest. In normal conditions, it was challenging. In a severe thunderstorm, with potential microbursts and wind shear, it might as well have been on the moon. Sam monitored the radio traffic as various aircraft reported their status. Westfield's fighter squadron was grounded due to weather minimums. The base's helicopter units were unable to operate in the electrical storm. One by one, every primary asset reported unable to complete the mission. She waited. This was the moment she'd been preparing for, but she needed it to develop naturally. She needed them to ask. 27 minutes passed. The emergency coordinator's voice grew increasingly urgent. "Any aircraft capable of mountain operations in severe weather, please respond. Personnel at Camp Dawson require immediate medical attention." Finally, Major Bennett's voice cut through. The radio chatter. "All available evacuation assets. Report capability for Camp Dawson approach." Sam keyed her radio calmly. "Tower Echo 7 is capable and ready for immediate supply delivery to Camp Dawson." The pause that followed was telling. She could almost hear the internal debate happening in the operations center. The same people who'd been marginalizing her for weeks were now faced with the reality that she might be their only option. Colonel Hayes's voice came through, tight with barely controlled frustration. "Echo 7, what's your assessment of current weather conditions for mountain approach?" "Ma'am, conditions are challenging but within acceptable parameters for terrain following approach. I've flown this route in similar weather previously." Another pause, then Bennett. "Echo 7, you're cleared for immediate launch. Medical supplies and communications equipment are being loaded now." As Sam fired up Echo 7's engines, she noticed something interesting happening across the tarmac. A small crowd had gathered near the operations building. Ground crews, administrative personnel, even some of the grounded fighter pilots. Word was spreading that the cargo hauler was launching into weather that had grounded everything else on base. Riley completed his pre-flight checks with unusual intensity. "Skip," he said. "Quietly, a lot of people are watching this one." "I know," Sam replied, her hands moving across the controls with practiced ease. "That's the point." The takeoff was smooth despite the crosswinds, but the real test came as they climbed into the teeth of the storm. Visibility dropped to near zero, forcing Sam to rely entirely on instruments and terrain awareness. She flew the route from memory, using valleys and ridgelines she'd memorized over dozens of previous flights. "Jesus," Riley muttered as they threaded between mountain peaks invisible in the dark soup around them. "I can't see anything." "You don't need to see," Sam said calmly. "You need to know where you are." The approach to Camp Dawson was a masterclass in precision flying. The narrow airstrip was surrounded by tall pines that created dangerous rotor effects and high winds. In perfect weather, it was challenging. In these conditions, it was nearly impossible. Nearly, Sam brought Echo 7 down through the clouds like she was threading a needle, using terrain features and wind patterns to guide her approach. When the airstrip finally appeared through the murk, just 100 feet below and perfectly aligned, Riley actually gasped. "How did you experience?" Sam said simply, setting the aircraft down with barely a bump. The supply delivery took 14 minutes. The camp's medical team loaded the injured personnel with practiced efficiency while Sam kept the engines running, monitoring weather conditions for the return flight. The injured included 2 with serious burns who needed immediate hospital care. The return flight was even more challenging as the storm had intensified, but Sam navigated through the weather with the same calm precision. bringing them home through conditions that would have challenged pilots with twice her experience. As Echo 7 touched down at base, Sam could see the crowd had grown. Ground crews lined the taxiway, watching as she rolled toward the medical facility where ambulances waited. The injured were transferred smoothly and rushed to the hospital, where doctors later confirmed that the rapid delivery of medical supplies and evacuation had prevented permanent disabilities. But the real impact became clear in the hours that followed. Video footage of the takeoff and landing, shot by various personnel on their phones, began circulating throughout the base. Unlike the polished official media coverage that had dominated the base's narrative, these videos showed something raw and authentic: a pilot doing an impossible job under impossible conditions, not for cameras or glory, but because people's lives depended on it. Master Sergeant Ramirez appeared in the operations tent during the post-mission briefing, carrying a thick folder. "Colonel," he said to Hayes, "I thought you might want to review these performance statistics before finalizing the mission report." The folder contained everything Sam had compiled: mission completion rates, weather minimums, emergency response times, and most damaging to the current narrative, a detailed comparison showing that cargo operations had consistently outperformed fighter units in actual emergency response scenarios. Hayes tried to control the damage. "These statistics don't account for the different mission parameters, Mom," Ramirez interrupted politely. "I've also included mission parameter data. Cargo operations have successfully completed 134 of 136 emergency missions over the past 3 years, including 27 in weather conditions that grounded other assets." The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room knew what they meant. While fighter operations had been optimized for media coverage, cargo operations had been doing the real work. Westfield, who'd been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. "Those are support missions," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Different skill set entirely." Lieutenant Rodriguez, who'd been listening from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Actually," he said quietly, "I'd like to see any fighter pilot threat in approach to camp. Dawson in zero visibility with electrical interference affecting instruments." What Captain Donovan did today was extraordinary by any measure. The room went quiet. Coming from another pilot, the endorsement carried weight that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. Major Bennett closed the folder slowly. "Captain Donovan," he said, "excellent work today. Lives were saved because of your crew's professionalism." It was a simple acknowledgement, but in that moment, everyone in the room understood that something fundamental had shifted. The narrative that had been carefully constructed over months was crumbling, replaced by something more powerful: undeniable proof of competence. As the briefing ended, Sam walked out of the operations tent to find her crew waiting by Echo 7. But they weren't alone. A dozen other personnel had gathered around the aircraft mechanics, ground crews, administrative staff, even a few pilots from other squadrons. "Hell of a flight, Captain," said one of the crew chiefs, a 20-year veteran who rarely offered praise. "Reminded me why I got into this business in the first place." Similar comments followed from others in the group. These weren't the carefully scripted endorsements that appeared in official media coverage. These were authentic expressions of professional respect from people who understood what they'd witnessed. Gabby looked at the gathering crowd and smiled. "Word's getting around?" Sam nodded, but she knew this was just the beginning. She'd proven her point under extreme conditions, but institutional change required more than one spectacular flight. The system that had tried to marginalize her was still in place, still controlled by people who valued image over substance. But now she had something she hadn't had before: undeniable evidence of her worth, captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people who couldn't be silenced or dismissed. The storm was passing, but the real weather was just beginning. The confrontation came exactly 1 week later, in the form of an all-hands meeting that Colonel Hayes called under the pretext of clarifying operational protocols and media procedures. Every pilot, crew chief, and senior enlisted personnel on base was required to attend, along with the embedded media representatives who'd been covering the squadron's activities. Sam knew what was coming. The Camp Dawson mission had generated too much positive attention for cargo operations, threatening the carefully constructed narrative that positioned fighter operations as the base's primary capability. Hayes needed to regain control of the story, and that meant dealing with the problem of Echo 7's growing reputation. The base theater was packed with personnel filling every seat and lining the walls. At the front, a large screen displayed the official agenda: Operational Excellence in Joint Operations. But Sam could feel the underlying tension in the room. Everyone knew this wasn't really about protocols. Colonel Hayes took the podium with her usual polished confidence, but Sam noticed something different in her demeanor. The easy authority was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, "recent events have highlighted the need for clarity regarding our operational priorities and public representation. While we appreciate the dedication shown by all personnel, it's important that we maintain appropriate focus on our primary mission capabilities." She clicked through several slides showing fighter aircraft in action, their sleek profiles gleaming under professional lighting. Our combat assets represent the pinnacle of American air power, and it's crucial that media coverage reflects this reality. Then came the slide Sam had been expecting, a graph showing mission types by operational priority, with cargo operations relegated to a small slice labeled logistics support. Support operations, Hayes continued, while valuable, must be understood in their proper context. Emergency responses and ad hoc missions, while dramatic, don't represent our core strategic capabilities. It was a masterful piece of political maneuvering, designed to minimize the Camp Dawson mission by repositioning it as an outlier rather than an example of operational excellence. But Hayes made one critical mistake. She underestimated her audience. From the middle of the theater, Master Sergeant Ramirez stood up. "Ma'am," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the room, "I have a question about those operational priorities." Hayes's smile tightened slightly. "Sergeant Ramirez, questions should be submitted through proper channels." "Ma'am, this seems like the proper channel," Ramirez replied politely. "You're presenting statistics about mission types, but I'm curious about mission success rates. Would you like me to share those numbers with the group?" The room went dead. Quiet. Hayes's composure cracked visibly. "Sergeant, that level of detail isn't appropriate for this forum." "Actually," Major Bennett said from the front row, surprising everyone, "I think the group would benefit from hearing those statistics. Please proceed, Sergeant Ramirez." Ramirez smiled and pulled out a folder. "Over the past 24 months, cargo operations have maintained a 97.3% mission success rate compared to 89.1% for fighter operations. More significantly, cargo operations have completed 100% of emergency medical evacuations, compared to 23% for other aircraft types." Murmurs rippled through the theater. Hayes tried to regain control. "Those statistics don't account for mission complexity." "Actually, ma'am, they do," Ramirez continued. "Cargo operations have consistently succeeded in adverse weather conditions that grounded other assets. They've completed missions in hostile territory, under equipment failures, and in emergency situations where other aircraft types were unable to respond." Lieutenant Rodriguez stood up from his seat near the back. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd like to add something to Sergeant Ramirez's comments." Hayes looked like she wanted to refuse, but with Bennett watching and journalists present, she had little choice. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "I've been flying for 6 years," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the silent theater. "I've flown with some excellent pilots, and I've seen some outstanding operations. But what Captain Donovan and her crew did at Camp Dawson was the finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed. He paused, letting his words sink in. That wasn't luck or a simple cargo run. That was precision flying under conditions that would challenge any pilot in any aircraft, and it saved lives. More murmurs, louder now. Hayes's carefully planned presentation was slipping away from her, but she made one final attempt to regain control. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," she said, her voice taking on an edge, "while we appreciate Captain Donovan's enthusiasm, we need to maintain perspective about operational capabilities. Emergency responses are not the same as combat operations." That's when Westfield made his fatal mistake. He stood up from the front row, his expression showing the frustration that had been building since Camp Dawson. "Exactly," he said, his voice carrying the arrogance that had defined his attitude for months. "Flying cargo in bad weather is impressive. But let's not pretend it's the same as real combat flying. Anyone can follow instruments through clouds." The words hung in the air like a slap. Westfield had just dismissed not only Sam's capabilities, but the expertise of every cargo pilot in the room. Worse, he'd done it in front of an audience that included veterans who'd flown combat missions in aircraft. Just like Echo 7. Frank stood up slowly from his seat near the wall. "Son," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the theater, "I've worked on aircraft like Echo 7 for 18 years, including 6 combat deployments. I've seen plenty of pilots who could make their aircraft dance in perfect weather, but I've only known a few who could navigate mountains in zero visibility using nothing but terrain masking techniques." He paused, looking directly at Westfield. "Captain Donovan doesn't follow instruments through clouds. Last week, when electrical interference was affecting navigation systems and visibility was zero, she flew that aircraft to Camp Dawson using skills that most pilots couldn't manage in perfect conditions." The theater was completely silent now. Even the journalists had stopped taking notes, sensing they were witnessing something more significant than a routine briefing. Riley stood up next. "Sir," he said to Westfield, with respect, "you've never flown with Captain Donovan in actual adverse conditions." "I have. For 2 years. I've watched her complete missions that other pilots wouldn't even attempt. She doesn't fly cargo. She flies whatever the mission requires, whenever it's required, under any conditions." Then Gabby stood up, followed by 3 other loadmasters from different aircraft. One by one, they offered quiet testimonials about flying with cargo crews, about missions completed when other assets were grounded, about professionalism that prioritized mission success over personal recognition. Colonel Hayes watched her carefully planned presentation collapse in real time. The narrative she'd tried to construct was being dismantled by the very people she'd tried to marginalize. Finally, Sam herself stood up. "Ma'am," she said, her voice calm and professional, "I'd like to address Captain Westfield's comment about following instruments through clouds." Hayes looked like she wanted to refuse, but the momentum in the room had shifted completely. "Go ahead, Captain." Sam reached into her flight bag and pulled out the worn photograph of her mother. "This is my mother, Captain Elizabeth Donovan, standing beside her C-130 during Operation Desert Storm. She flew that aircraft when navigation systems were primitive by today's standards, when pilots had to rely on skill and judgment more than technology." She held the photo up so the room could see it. "Last week at Camp Dawson, I used the same techniques my mother taught me years ago, not because the technology failed, but because sometimes technology isn't enough. Sometimes you need a pilot who understands that flying isn't about looking good in perfect conditions. It's about getting the job done when everything else fails." She put the photo away carefully. "Captain Westfield, you're right about one thing. What I do isn't the same as what you do. What I do is harder." The silence that followed was absolute. Hayes stood at the podium, her presentation in ruins, her narrative completely destroyed. Westfield sat frozen, his arrogance finally revealed. as the hollow posturing it had always been. Major Bennett stood up slowly. "Thank you, Captain Donovan," he said. "I think you've clarified things considerably." He turned to address the room. "This briefing is concluded. Captain Donovan, please. See me in my office at your earliest convenience." As personnel began filing out of the theater, Sam felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Lieutenant Rodriguez smiling at her. "That," he said quietly, "was exactly what needed to be said." Around them, dozens of other personnel were approaching, offering congratulations and expressions of support. For the first time in months, Sam felt like she belonged exactly where she was. The fight wasn't over. Institutional change would take time, and there would be other battles to come. But in that moment, in front of everyone who mattered, she had proven something that couldn't be argued or dismissed. Competence speaks louder than politics, and real professionals recognize each other, regardless of what aircraft they fly. 3 weeks later, the first signs of real change began to appear. Colonel Hayes was quietly reassigned to a staff position at Pentagon, cited for her valuable public affairs expertise that would benefit headquarters operations. Major Bennett was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given full command of base operations. His first official act was to integrate cargo and fighter missions into a unified operational framework that recognized the unique capabilities of each aircraft type. Westfield found himself transferred to a training squadron, where his media-friendly appearance could be put to use teaching new pilots rather than undermining experienced ones. The base's operational priorities were restructured to reflect actual capabilities rather than public relations considerations. But the most significant changes came in the day-to-day operations. When emergencies arose, and they still did, regularly, the first question from base operations was no longer which primary assets are available, but rather which aircraft is best suited for this mission. More often than not, that aircraft was Echo 7. The transformation had been noticed far beyond their base. Military aviation magazines ran feature articles about the cargo pilot who had changed perceptions across an entire command. Professional journals published analyses of Sam's Camp Dawson approach, using it as a case study in precision flying under adverse conditions. The video footage shot by ground personnel had gone viral within military circles, garnering thousands of views and hundreds of comments from pilots around the world who recognized true skill when they saw it. But the recognition that mattered most to Sam came from her peers. Lieutenant Rodriguez had put in for a transfer to cargo operations, saying he wanted to learn from the real professionals. 3 other fighter pilots had quietly approached her for advice on weather flying and terrain navigation. Even some of Westfield's former squadron mates had begun treating her with the respect her capabilities had always deserved. The most satisfying change, however, was operational. Echo 7 and its crew were now regularly called upon for the most challenging missions, the ones that required precision, experience, and the kind of judgment that couldn't be taught in a simulator. Rayleigh had been selected for advanced training, with Sam's enthusiastic recommendation. Gabby had been promoted to senior master sergeant and assigned to develop specialized loading procedures for emergency medical evacuations. Frank had been recognized with a commendation for his role in maintaining Echo 7's perfect operational readiness record, military language for performing mechanical miracles on aging aircraft. On this particular morning, as Sam completed her pre-flight inspection, she noticed a young lieutenant approaching hesitantly. The woman wore new flight wings and carried herself with the mixture of confidence and uncertainty that marked all new pilots. "Captain Donovan," the lieutenant said, "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I've just been assigned to cargo operations, and I was wondering, could I observe your pre-flight routine? I've heard you're someone worth learning from." Sam smiled, remembering her own early days when she'd watched experienced pilots with the same hungry attention to detail. "Of course," she said, "but first let me show you something." She led Sarah to Echo 7's cockpit and pulled out the photograph. Of her mother. "This was my mother," Sam explained. "She flew C-130s when women in combat aviation were even rarer than they are now. She taught me that flying isn't about the aircraft you're in. It's about knowing your capabilities and never accepting limitations others try to place on you." Sarah studied the photo carefully. What happened to her? She got tired of fighting. A system that didn't value what she brought to the mission, Sam said. But she never stopped being an exceptional pilot, and she never stopped believing that competence matters more than politics. She carefully returned the photo to its place. "The difference is, I had better allies when my fight came. And now, so do you." As they walked through the pre-flight inspection together, Sam felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with recognition or revenge. She had fought for something bigger than personal vindication. She had fought for the principle that merit should matter more than image, that real professionals should be valued regardless of which aircraft they flew or how they looked on camera. The system hadn't changed completely. There were still politics, still people who valued appearance over substance. But now there was also precedent, proof that competence could overcome prejudice when the right people were willing to stand up and be counted. The real test, however, was still to come. The mission seemed routine at first, a supply run to a forward research station in Alaska's Brooks Range. The weather forecast predicted clear conditions with moderate winds, nothing that would challenge Echo 7's capabilities. Sam and her crew, prepared as they always did, methodically checking every system and reviewing every procedure. Rayleigh had completed his advanced training and returned as her co-pilot, more confident now but still learning from her experience. 2 new crew members had joined them, Technical Sergeant Maria Hernandez replacing Frank, who had been promoted to maintenance supervision, and Staff Sergeant Devin Williams, a former pararescue jumper who had transferred to cargo operations. The takeoff was smooth, the climb to cruising altitude uneventful. 3 hours into the 6-hour flight, they were over the most remote part of their route when the first warning light illuminated on the instrument panel. "Right engine oil pressure dropping," Riley reported, his voice calm but concerned. Before Sam could respond, a second warning appeared. "Left engine temperature rising beyond limits." Then a third, "Electrical system malfunction in Zone 2. Multiple simultaneous failures were almost never coincidental." Sam immediately scanned the external sensors. "We've got a fire in the right wing," she announced, her voice steady. "Possible damage to the electrical and hydraulic systems. Riley, run the engine shutdown checklist for number 4. Maria, prepare for potential emergency landing. Devin, strap in and secure all equipment." They worked with the smooth coordination of professionals who had trained for emergencies, even as the situation deteriorated rapidly. The fire suppression system activated, but failed to contain the spreading flames. Thick smoke began filling the cockpit, forcing them to don oxygen. "Masks." "Mayday, mayday," Sam transmitted. "Echo 7 declaring emergency. Fire in right wing, multiple systems compromised. Position 64 degrees north, 147 west. Descending to find emergency landing site." The response from distant early warning station November was immediate but not encouraging. "Echo 7, this is due November. We show your position over extremely rugged terrain. Nearest suitable landing area is Frozen Lake, approximately 40 miles east of your position. Search and rescue has been notified, but cannot reach your location for minimum 3 hours due to current conditions." Sam assessed their options with the clarity that comes from intense training. The burning wing would likely fail within minutes. The hydraulic systems controlling their flaps and landing gear were showing intermittent failures. The electrical system was failing, affecting their navigation and communication capabilities. And then the situation went from dire to catastrophic. A loud bang shook the aircraft as the fire reached a fuel line. The entire right wing was now engulfed in flames, and the structural integrity was visibly compromised. Worse, the explosion had knocked Rayleigh unconscious, his head slamming against the side window before Sam could warn him. In the cargo bay, Maria and Devon had been thrown to the floor. Maria's voice came through the intercom, strained but functional. "Captain, Williams is down. Possible broken arm. I'm mobile, but the cargo has shifted." With one glance at the medical telemetry showing Riley's condition as stable, Sam made her decision. "Maria, secure Williams and yourself as best you can. We're going to attempt an emergency landing. That frozen lake is our only chance." The aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control, with the right wing compromised and hydraulic systems failing. Sam had to use every bit of her skill and strength to maintain a controlled descent. The navigation system flickered and died, forcing her to rely on visual references and her knowledge of the terrain. Through the smoke and the pain in her lungs, Sam focused on one thing: bringing her crew home alive. Every technique she had ever learned, every emergency she had ever trained for, every bit of knowledge passed down from her mother, it all converged in this moment. The frozen lake appeared through breaks in the clouds, a white oval in a landscape of dark forest and jagged mountains. With no working landing gear and minimal control surfaces, Sam would have to essentially crash land the burning aircraft on the ice and hope it held. "Brace for impact," she called through the intercom. 20 seconds. The C-130 descended toward the ice in a controlled fall rather than a proper approach. Sam fought the controls, using the remaining engine power to maintain just enough lift to avoid a fatal nosedive. The burning wing created massive asymmetrical drag, trying to spin the aircraft into a death spiral. With muscles straining and sweat pouring down her face despite the sub-zero air now rushing through cracks in the fuselage, Sam kept the plane's nose up as the frozen lake rushed toward them. The impact came in stages. First, the burning wing tip scraped the ice, shearing off in a shower of sparks and flaming debris. Then the belly of the aircraft slammed down, skidding across the frozen surface with a scream of tearing metal. The remaining engines tore free from their mounts, and the fuselage twisted as it decelerated violently. After what seemed like an eternity of noise and violence, Echo 7 came to rest near the center of the frozen lake, a smoking wreck that barely resembled an aircraft, but it held together just enough. It didn't break through the ice. And most importantly, the crew compartment remained largely intact. Through the pain of her own injuries, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and numerous cuts, Sam unbuckled her harness and checked on Riley. He was unconscious but breathing steadily. She secured his oxygen mask and then made her way back to the cargo bay. Maria had managed to strap both herself and Devon to secured anchors before impact. Devon's arm was clearly broken, and Maria had a deep gash on her forehead, but both were alive and conscious. "We need to evacuate," Sam ordered, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. The fuel tanks could still explode. "Maria, help me with Riley. Devon, can you walk?" "Yes, Captain," Devon said through gritted teeth. "Just don't ask me to carry anything heavy." Working together despite their injuries, they extracted Riley from the cockpit and made their way through the twisted cargo bay to the emergency exit. The bitter Arctic air hit them like a physical blow as they emerged onto the ice, but it was cleaner than the smoke-filled cabin. Sam activated their emergency locator beacon and deployed the survival kit. With the temperature well below zero and darkness approaching, their immediate challenge was no longer the crashed aircraft but the deadly cold. Using debris from the cargo that had scattered across the ice, they constructed a makeshift shelter against the wind. The survival kit contained emergency blankets, a small heater, and basic medical supplies. Sam set Devon's broken arm as best she could and cleaned the wound on Maria's forehead. Riley remained unconscious, but his breathing was steady, and his pulse was strong. "Search and rescue will be looking for us," Sam told her injured crew, as they huddled together for warmth. "We just need to survive until they arrive." The hours that followed tested their endurance to the limit. The temperature continued to drop as night fell. The wind howled across the frozen lake, threatening to tear away their fragile shelter. Riley finally regained consciousness, but was disoriented and in pain from a severe concussion. Through it all, Sam remained the calm center of their survival effort. She rotated the heating packs to prevent frostbite, kept everyone alert and talking to ward off hypothermia, and maintained a constant watch for signs of rescue. When the sound of helicopter rotors finally cut through the howling wind nearly 5 hours after the crash, Sam used their last emergency flare to signal their position. The search and rescue team found 4 half-frozen survivors huddled together on the ice, all injured but alive, kept that way by the determination and leadership of their captain. As the rescue helicopter lifted them away from the wreckage of Echo 7, Sam looked down at the aircraft that had been her home for so many years. In its final mission, it had done what it was designed to do: protect its crew, even in catastrophic failure. Much later, after they had all been treated for their injuries and the investigation into the crash had begun, Sam learned the cause of the fire: a manufacturing defect in a replacement part that had gone undetected during maintenance. No one could have predicted it or prevented it. What mattered was what happened afterward: how she had managed to land a burning, crippled aircraft with failed hydraulics and electrical systems, saving her entire crew against impossible odds. The story of Echo 7's final flight spread throughout the Air Force. What had begun as a routine supply mission had turned into one of the most remarkable demonstrations of piloting skill in recent military history. The flight data recorder, miraculously intact, provided a minute-by-minute record of Sam's actions during the crisis, becoming required study at flight school. When asked by the investigation board how she had managed to maintain control of an aircraft with catastrophic wing damage and multiple system failures, Sam's answer was simple: "I flew the aircraft I had, not the aircraft I wanted." That phrase became something of a motto among pilots, a reminder that real flying isn't about perfect conditions and flawless equipment, but about adapting to reality and making the best of whatever situation you face. 6 months later, fully recovered from her injuries, Sam stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, feeling strangely out of place in her dress uniform as the Secretary of the Air Force pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her chest. Captain Samantha Donovan, the citation read, displayed extraordinary heroism and outstanding flying skill during an aircraft emergency over remote terrain. With her aircraft suffering catastrophic damage from an uncontained engine fire, Captain Donovan maintained control long enough to locate a suitable emergency landing site. Despite multiple system failures, loss of hydraulic control, and an unconscious co-pilot, she successfully executed an emergency landing that saved the lives of her entire crew. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military aviation. As the ceremony concluded and the attendees mingled during the reception, Sam found herself approached by a tall woman in the uniform of a full colonel. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar. "Captain Donovan," the colonel said with a warm smile. "I'm Colonel Elizabeth Donovan, retired. I believe you've been carrying my photo in your flight bag." Sam felt her heart stop. "Mom?" The woman's smile widened. "When I saw the news reports about a female C-130 pilot landing a burning aircraft to save her crew, I knew it had to be you. I've been following your career from a distance, but after this, I thought it was time we reconnected." Sam struggled to find words. "But you've been gone for years. After you left the service, you disappeared." Elizabeth Donovan's expression softened. "I needed time to find myself again after the Air Force, but I never stopped being proud of you, and I never stopped believing you would surpass everything I accomplished." Later that evening, mother and daughter sat in a quiet corner of a Washington restaurant, sharing stories and rebuilding bridges that had been damaged by years of absence. "You know what I realized when I saw your landing on the news?" Elizabeth said. "The system tried to do to you exactly what it did to me all those years ago, but the difference is, you didn't let them win. You didn't walk away." Sam looked at her mother, seeing for the first time the mixture of strength and regret in her eyes. "I had your example," she said quietly. "Even when you weren't there, I had your lessons. When the storm comes, they don't care what patch is on your shoulder. They only care if you can fly." Elizabeth smiled, recognition lighting her eyes. "You still have that old photo." "It saved my life," Sam said simply, "and the lives of my crew." As they talked into the night, Sam realized that her journey had come full circle. She had started by trying to prove herself in her mother's shadow, then fought to be recognized in a system that valued flash over substance. Now she had become something her mother had never managed to be, a catalyst for change. Someone who had forced the system to recognize true excellence, regardless of where it was found. 3 months later, Sam Donovan accepted her promotion to Major, along with a new assignment, commander of the newly formed Special Operations Airlift Group, a unit designed specifically for missions that required the unique skills she had demonstrated throughout her career. Her first official act was to establish a mentorship program for female pilots across all aircraft types, creating formal channels for the kind of support she had fought so hard to find. Her second was to implement new training protocols that emphasized real-world emergency management over procedural perfection. As she pinned on her gold oak leaves, Sam thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from the marginalized cargo pilot fighting for recognition to the decorated officer changing the system from within. She thought about Echo 7, about her mother's photograph, about all the lessons learned in the crucible of crisis. They had called her just a cargo pilot once. Now they called her something else entirely, a leader who had proven, once and for all, that true excellence isn't about which aircraft you fly or how you look in a publicity photo. It's about what you do when the stakes are highest, when lives hang in the balance, and when all that matters is whether you can bring your people home safe when the lights go out. 5 years after the frozen lake landing, Major Samantha Donovan stood on the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base, watching the formation of C-130s approach from the east. The morning sun caught their wings, transforming the utilitarian cargo aircraft into gleaming silver birds against the pale blue sky. As the lead plane banked into its final approach, Sam felt a familiar tightness in her chest, pride mingled with the weight of responsibility. The Special Operations Airlift Group she had built from the ground up was returning from their most challenging deployment yet, 6 months, providing critical support to humanitarian operations in a conflict zone where conventional aircraft couldn't operate due to persistent threats and difficult terrain. They had flown over 300 missions without a single loss, evacuating civilians, delivering medical supplies, and supporting special forces operations in conditions that would have grounded most air assets. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, promoted last year, and now her executive officer, stood beside her, datapad in hand. "All birds accounted for, ma'am. Final mission statistics are impressive. 2,847 civilians evacuated, 1,200 tons of humanitarian aid delivered, 0 casualties despite 17 incidents of ground fire." Sam nodded, her eyes never leaving the approaching aircraft. "The numbers matter less than the people inside those planes, Colonel. Both the crews and the ones they helped." Rodriguez smiled. "That's why they follow you, ma'am. Because you never forget that." The transformation of the past 5 years still amazed Sam when she allowed herself to reflect on it. What had begun as her personal battle against marginalization had evolved into something much more significant, a fundamental shift in how the Air Force viewed and utilized cargo operations. The Special Operations Airlift Group, represented the institutional acknowledgement that cargo pilots often possessed skills and capabilities that were essential in the most demanding environments. More importantly, it represented a pathway for talented aviators who might otherwise have been overlooked in a system that had traditionally prioritized fighter operations for advancement and recognition. Now cargo pilots had their own elite unit, their own distinct career track, and their own opportunity to demonstrate excellence on their own terms. As the first C-130 touched down with barely a bump, a perfect landing despite the crosswind, Sam allowed herself a moment of personal satisfaction. Riley was at the controls of that aircraft, now a major himself and one of her most trusted squadron leaders. He'd come a long way from the nervous young co-pilot who had once worried about speaking up in briefings. The ceremony that followed was brief but meaningful. The Secretary of the Air Force had flown in specifically to recognize the group's achievements, presenting the unit with the Outstanding Unit Award and several individual decorations for particularly distinguished service. Sam stood at attention as citations were read and medals pinned, but her greatest satisfaction came from watching her pilots and crew members receive the recognition they had earned. Later, as the formal reception wound down, Sam found herself approached by a familiar figure, her mother, Colonel Elizabeth Donovan, now 5 years into retirement, but still carrying herself with the unmistakable posture of a military aviator. "Quite a day," Elizabeth said, embracing her daughter. "Your father would have been proud." "He would have been proud of both of us," Sam replied. The reconciliation with her mother had been one of the unexpected blessings of the past few years, healing wounds that had festered for too long. Elizabeth glanced around the reception, where pilots and crew members from diverse backgrounds mingled with senior officers and officials. "You know what makes me happiest? Looking around this room and seeing so many women in flight suits. When I started, I could count all the female C-130 pilots on one hand with fingers to spare." Sam nodded. The group's demographics told a powerful story. 38% female pilots compared to the Air Force-wide average of 21%, with similar increases in diversity across other metrics. They had become a magnet for talent that might once have been overlooked or diverted elsewhere. "Major Donovan," a voice interrupted their conversation. Sam turned to find herself facing General William Hayes, the Air Force Chief of Staff. "I wonder if I might have a word in private?" Elizabeth squeezed her daughters' arm and stepped away, leaving Sam to follow the general to a quieter corner of the room. "First, let me congratulate you on the group's performance," Hayes began. "What you've built here has exceeded all expectations. The Joint Chiefs are taking notice." "Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to the personnel who put their lives on the line every day." Has smiled. "Always deflecting praise to your people. That's one of the things people respect about you." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I've been authorized to inform you that you're being considered for promotion to full colonel, with a potential appointment as the next commander of the Air Mobility Experimental Squadron at Edwards." Sam felt her breath catch. The Airbase was the Air Force's premier testing unit for next-generation transport and cargo aircraft, a prestigious command that would put her at the forefront of developing the future of military airlift capabilities. "That's unexpected, sir. Is it?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You've demonstrated exceptional leadership, technical innovation, and the ability to get results in challenging circumstances. Those are precisely the qualities we need at AIMS." Before Sam could respond, Hayes continued, "There's something else you should know. The preliminary designs for the next-generation tactical transport, the one that will eventually replace the C-130, were submitted last month. The airframe that's currently leading the evaluation is designated the XC-23 Donovan." For a moment, Sam thought she had misheard. "Sir? Named after your mother," Hayes clarified. "Her innovations in cargo delivery techniques and adverse weather operations have been incorporated into the basic design philosophy." The aircraft is being engineered specifically to excel in the kinds of missions your mother pioneered and that you've perfected. Sam struggled to maintain her composure. In the military, having an aircraft class named after you was an honor typically reserved for legendary figures. That her mother would receive such recognition, and that Sam herself might command the unit testing that aircraft represented a validation she had never imagined possible. "I'm honored to be considered, sir," she finally managed. "And I know my mother will be overwhelmed." Hayes nodded. "The official announcement about the aircraft designation will come next week. As for the promotion and command assignment, you'll receive formal notification through channels, but I wanted you to have time to consider it." He paused. "I should mention there's also interest in having you lead the new Advanced Pilot Training Initiative at the Air Force Academy. Your choice, if you want it." As Hayes moved away to speak with other officers, Sam stood quietly processing the conversation. From marginalized cargo pilot to potential colonel commanding cutting-edge programs, the journey seemed almost unbelievable. "You look like someone just told you they're naming a mountain after you," came a familiar voice. Riley appeared at her side, flight suit still crisp despite the long mission. "Not a mountain," Sam said quietly. "An airplane." She explained the conversation with Hayes as they moved toward the windows overlooking the flight line, where the group's C-130s stood in neat formation. "So Edwards are the academy?" Riley asked when she had finished. "Both are impressive opportunities." Sam watched a ground crew performing post-flight maintenance on the nearest aircraft, their movements practiced and efficient. "I'm not sure yet. Both would mean leaving the group." "The group will be fine," Riley assured her. "You've built something that will outlast any single commander. That's what real leadership accomplishes, creating systems and cultures that continue to function even after you're gone." Sam smiled at her former co-pilot, now a trusted friend and colleague. "When did you get so wise, Major?" "I had a good teacher," he replied simply. The decision wasn't made that day, or even that week. Sam took the time to consider both opportunities carefully, consulting with her mother, with Rodriguez, with Riley, and with others whose judgment she trusted. Each option offered different possibilities for influence and impact. Edwards would put her at the forefront of technical innovation, helping shape the future of military airlift through direct involvement with aircraft development and testing. The academy would allow her to influence the next generation of pilots, directly, potentially reshaping attitudes and expectations from the ground up. In the end, the decision crystallized during a routine training flight. Sam had taken the controls of a C-130 for a complex terrain-following exercise, the kind of mission that had once been her daily responsibility. As the aircraft hugged the contours of a mountain range, sensors providing constant feedback about terrain and obstacles, she felt the familiar sense of focus and purpose that had defined her career. Banking around a particularly challenging ridgeline, Sam suddenly realized that the most important element of her success had never been the aircraft itself, or even her own piloting skills. It had been the culture she had helped create, a culture that valued substance over appearance, that recognized excellence wherever it appeared, that judged people by their capabilities rather than their conformity to expectations. That culture could be built at Edwards. It could be built at the academy. But it would have the greatest impact if she could build it across the entire training pipeline that created new pilots. 3 weeks later, Sam accepted the position at the Air Force Academy, along with her promotion to full colonel. Her new responsibilities would include not just teaching cadets, but redesigning significant portions of the pilot training curriculum to better reflect the realities of modern military aviation. The farewell ceremony for the Special Operations Airlift Group was both emotional and affirming. Standing before the assembled personnel, pilots, navigators, loadmasters, mechanics, and support staff, Sam felt a surge of pride that nearly overwhelmed her professional composure. 5 years ago, she began, Many of us stood on this same tarmac as a new and untested unit. We had something to prove not just to the Air Force, but to ourselves. We faced skepticism, we faced institutional inertia, and we faced operational challenges that many thought were insurmountable. She paused, looking across the faces of people who had become more than colleagues. They had become a family united by shared purpose and mutual respect. Today, we stand here as the most decorated cargo unit in Air Force history. Not because we sought recognition, but because we focused on excellence in every aspect of our operations. Not because we had the newest aircraft or the most advanced technology, but because we had the best people who understood that true aviation excellence isn't about how you look, it's about what you can do when lives depend on you. Sam gestured toward Rodriguez, who would be taking command of the group. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez will lead you forward into new challenges and new achievements. Support him as you have supported me. Challenge him as you have challenged me, and continue to redefine what's possible in military airlift operations. The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. As Sam made her way through the crowd, accepting handshakes, hugs, and well wishes, she found herself approached by a young female lieutenant who had joined the group just 6 months earlier. "Colonel," the lieutenant said, her voice slightly hesitant, "I just wanted to say, before I was assigned to this unit, I was considering leaving the Air Force. As a cargo pilot, I felt invisible, like my contributions didn't matter compared to the fighter squadrons." Sam nodded, remembering all too well that feeling of marginalization. "But seeing what you built here," the lieutenant continued, "seeing how a cargo pilot could make such an impact, it changed everything for me. You showed us all that it's not about the type of aircraft you fly. It's about how you fly it and why." "What's your name, Lieutenant?" Sam asked. "Jennifer Torres, ma'am." "Well, Lieutenant Torres, remember this. In aviation, as in life, there will always be people who judge you by superficial standards, the patch on your shoulder, the aircraft you're assigned to, even your gender. Don't waste energy trying to change their minds. Focus instead on being so good at what you do that your excellence becomes impossible to ignore." Torres straightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I intend to do." Sam smiled. "Then, I expect to hear great things about you in the future, Lieutenant." As Torres moved away, Sam found herself approached by her mother, who had been watching the exchange from nearby. "You know," Elizabeth said thoughtfully, "watching you with that young lieutenant reminds me of something my own mentor told me years ago. She said that our most important legacy isn't the missions we fly, or the records we set. It's the doors we open for those who come after us." Sam nodded. "I think about that every day. Every time I see a female pilot in a briefing room, or a cargo crew receiving recognition for a difficult mission. I think about all the barriers that had to fall to make that possible. And you've knocked down more than your share," Elizabeth said proudly. "The Academy is lucky to have you. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When they let you test fly the XC-23 Donovan prototype, and they will take your old mother along for the ride." Sam laughed. "Deal." The transition to the Air Force Academy brought new challenges and opportunities. As the head of the Advanced Pilot Training Initiative, Sam was tasked with revolutionizing how the next generation of military aviators were educated and evaluated. Drawing on her own experiences, she implemented significant changes to the traditional training model. First, she eliminated the artificial hierarchy between different aircraft types, creating an integrated curriculum that emphasized core aviation skills applicable across platforms. Fighter, cargo, tanker, reconnaissance all were presented as equally vital components of air power, each requiring specific talents and capabilities. Second, she developed new simulation scenarios that deliberately challenged conventional thinking. Cadets might find themselves flying a C-130 through combat conditions, or a fighter jet tasked with precision supply drops to isolated ground forces. The goal was to create adaptable aviators who could think beyond traditional mission parameters. Third, she established mentorship programs that paired cadets with experienced pilots from diverse backgrounds, ensuring that female and minority cadets had visible role models and advocates within the system. The Donovan Initiative, as it came to be known, created formal pathways for support and guidance that had been sorely lacking in Sam's own early career. The results spoke for themselves. Within 2 years, the Academy was producing graduates with demonstrably better adaptability scores, higher technical proficiency across multiple aircraft types, and significantly improved performance in crisis simulations. More importantly, the culture was changing. The old distinctions between real pilots and support pilots were fading, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of the diverse skills required in modern air operations. On a crisp autumn morning, 3 years into her tenure at the Academy, Sam stood on the observation deck at Edwards Air Force Base, watching as the prototype C-130 Donovan taxied toward the runway for its first official test flight. The aircraft represented a radical departure from traditional cargo design, more streamlined than the boxy C-130, with adaptive wing geometry that could reconfigure for different mission profiles, and an integrated defensive suite that allowed operations in contested airspace. Beside her stood her mother, Elizabeth, now 70, but still straight-backed and keen-eyed. They watched in shared silence as the aircraft began its takeoff roll, accelerating smoothly before lifting into the clear desert sky, with a grace that belied its substantial size. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth said softly as the aircraft banked into its first test pattern. "I never imagined that they'd name it after you," Sam finished. "I did. Once people finally understood what you pioneered, what all cargo pilots contribute, it was inevitable." The test pilot's voice came through the speakers in the observation deck. "Our EPORTING initial handling characteristics and system performance. Everything was nominal better than nominal, in fact. The aircraft was exceeding its design specifications in early maneuverability tests. When the XC-23 finally landed 2 hours later, the test pilot, a former member of Sam's Special Operations Airlift Group, emerged from the aircraft with an expression of undisguised enthusiasm. "Colonel Donovan," he called to Elizabeth as he approached. "She flies like she was born for rough conditions." The terrain-following system handled the test course at 300 feet AGL without breaking a sweat, and the defensive countermeasures integrated perfectly with the avionics. He turned to Sam. "Ma'am, with your permission, we'd like to accelerate the evaluation schedule. This bird is ready for Phase 2 testing ahead of projections." "Proceed, Major," Sam authorized. "But maintain safety protocols. We're not in a race." "Yes, ma'am. Though I should mention the Chinese have their own next-gen transport in development. Word is they're calling it a strategic game-changer for their force projection capabilities." After the Major departed, Elizabeth turned to her daughter. With a raised eyebrow, "Competition never ends, does it?" "No," Sam agreed. "But neither does innovation. And we've got a pretty significant head start, thanks to the groundwork you laid decades ago." 2 weeks later, Sam finally got her opportunity to pilot the aircraft named after her mother. With Elizabeth in the observer seat behind her, Sam took the XC-23 through a series of increasingly challenging maneuvers, designed to test its capabilities at the edges of the performance envelope. The aircraft responded beautifully, its advanced flight systems translating Sam's commands into precise control surface adjustments that maintain stability even in complex terrain following sequences. It was, Sam realized, the culmination of everything her mother had pioneered and everything Sam herself had advocated for an aircraft, designed from the ground up for the kind of flying that had once been dismissed as mere cargo hauling. "What do you think?" Sam asked her mother as they completed a particularly challenging mountain approach simulation. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her eyes taking in the streamlined cockpit with its integrated displays and ergonomic design. "I think," she said finally, "that this is what progress looks like. Not just a better aircraft, but a better understanding of what aviation can and should be." The C-130 Donovan entered operational service 2 years later, quickly establishing itself as the most versatile tactical transport in the Air Force inventory. Its combination of extended range, rough field capability, defensive systems, and reconfigurable cargo space made it ideal for the complex, multi-domain operations that increasingly characterized modern military deployments. More significantly, the pilots selected for the initial operational squadrons came from diverse backgrounds, some from fighter communities, others from traditional cargo units, all chosen for their demonstrated excellence rather than their conformity to outdated stereotypes. The culture that Sam had worked so hard to build was becoming institutionalized, embedded in the very structure of how the Air Force trained, assigned, and advanced its aviators. On the 10th anniversary of the Frozen Lake landing, now Brigadier General Samantha Donovan stood at a podium in the Air Force Academy's main auditorium, addressing the graduating class of cadets. Among them were the first graduates of the completely redesigned pilot training program. She had implemented young men and women who had never known the old divisions between aircraft types, who had been educated from day one to value adaptability, innovation, and excellence in all its forms. As you prepare to receive your commissions and begin your careers as Air Force officers, Sam told them, "I want to share a story that shaped my own understanding of what it means to be a military aviator." She recounted the story of Echo 7's final flight, not the sanitized version that appeared in official reports, but the raw reality of fighting to control a burning aircraft with failing systems and unconscious crew members. She described the moment of impact on the frozen lake, the struggle to evacuate her injured team, the long hours waiting for rescue in the bitter Arctic cold. The measure of aviators, she concluded, is not found in the aircraft they fly or the missions they're assigned. It's not found in patches or promotion rates or publicity photos. It's found in those critical moments when everything has gone wrong, when systems are failing and options are disappearing, when lives hang in the balance and the only thing standing between disaster and survival is your training, your judgment, and your determination. She paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. In those moments, no one cares what kind of aircraft you fly. They only care if you can bring your people home. After the ceremony, as cadets and families mingled during the reception, Sam found herself approached by a woman in her early 60s, wearing the uniform of a commercial airline captain. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar. "General Donovan," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Rachel Martinez. We've never formally met, but I believe you knew my younger brother, James." Sam searched her memory. "James Westfield, the fighter pilot?" Martinez nodded. "The same. He retired as a lieutenant colonel 5 years ago. Now flies corporate jets out of Dallas." Sam wasn't sure how to respond. Her history with Westfield had been contentious at best, antagonistic at worst. "I hope he's doing well," she offered diplomatically. "He is," Martinez assured her. "But that's not why I wanted to speak with you. I'm here because my daughter graduates today, Lieutenant Angela Martinez, assigned to the 89th Airlift Squadron. She'll be flying C-17s out of Wright-Patterson." "Congratulations," Sam said sincerely. "The 89th is an excellent unit." "She's wanted to be a cargo pilot since she was 12 years old," Martinez continued. "Specifically, since the day she saw a news report about a female C-130 pilot who landed a burning aircraft on a frozen lake in Alaska. That pilot became her hero, the reason she applied to the academy, the reason she persisted when things got difficult." Sam felt a familiar tightness in her chest. I'm honored that my experience inspired her, Martinez smiled. It wasn't just your flying that inspired her. It was what you did afterward, how you changed the culture, how you created space for people like my daughter to be valued for their skills rather than judged by outdated standards. She paused. Even my brother eventually came around. After your frozen lake landing, he couldn't keep pretending that cargo pilots were somehow less skilled or less important. I'm glad to hear that, Sam said, genuinely surprised. Sometimes I wondered if anything really changed. Everything changed, Martinez assured her. Ask any young pilot today about the difference between fighter operations and cargo operations, and you'll get a blank stare. They don't think in those terms anymore. They think in terms of mission requirements and individual capabilities. That's your legacy, General, not just the aircraft or the programs, but the fundamental shift in how we value different types of aviation excellence. Later that evening, as the sun set over the academy grounds, Sam stood alone on the observation deck of the aviation center that now bore her mother's name. Below, cadets moved between buildings, their futures stretching before them, filled with possibilities that Sam herself had helped create. She thought about Echo 7, about the frozen lake, about all the battles large and small that had brought her to this point. She thought about the young lieutenant who would soon be flying C-130s. Because of a news report she had seen as a child. She thought about the aircraft bearing her mother's name that was now deploying around the world, changing what was possible in military airlift operations. Most of all, she thought about that moment in the burning cockpit when everything had depended on her skill and judgment, when politics and perceptions had fallen away, leaving only the pure, essential challenge of bringing her people home safe. They had called her just a cargo pilot once. Now they called her general and professor and pioneer. They put her picture in textbooks and named leadership awards after her. But in her own mind, the most important title remained the simplest: pilot, because in the end, that's what mattered, not the type of aircraft or the mission profile, but the ability to fly when it counted most. As she turned to leave, Sam noticed a young female cadet standing nearby, watching her with an expression of nervous determination. "Can I help you, cadet?" Sam asked. "General Donovan," the cadet said, straightening to attention. "I just wanted to say, I've been struggling with my decision on which track to pursue. Everyone keeps telling me I should go fighters because of my simulator scores, but what I really want is to fly cargo." Sam finished for her, smiling slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I want to fly missions that directly help people, evacuations, humanitarian aid, the kind of operations where you can see the impact immediately. But I worry about limiting my career potential." Sam considered the young woman thoughtfully. "Cadet, let me ask you something. When you imagine yourself in the cockpit, what kind of flying excites you most? The kind where you push the envelope of performance in relatively controlled conditions, or the kind where you adapt to unpredictable challenges in complex environments?" The cadet didn't hesitate. "The second one, ma'am. I want to be the pilot they call when nothing is going according to plan." "Then you already know your answer," Sam said simply. "Follow that instinct. The Air Force needs pilots with that mindset, regardless of which aircraft they fly. And as for career potential," she gestured to the stars on her own shoulders, "those boundaries only exist if we accept them." The cadet's face brightened. "Thank you, General." As the young woman walked away, Sam felt a sense of completion that transcended all her formal accomplishments. This changing the perception of what was possible, opening doors for those who followed, this was the true measure of what she had achieved. They had called her just a cargo pilot until she landed a burning C-130 alone. But her greatest victory wasn't that dramatic rescue. It was ensuring that no one would ever again dismiss a pilot as just anything. In aviation, as in life, true excellence speaks for itself. And when the lights go out and the systems fail, When lives hang in the balance and everything depends on skill and courage and determination, that's when the labels fall away and only one question remains. Can you fly when it matters most? For Samantha Donovan, the answer had always been yes. And now, because of her, countless others would have the chance to prove the same. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.